The last time my daughter remembered Thanksgiving, my husband Roger was still standing at the kitchen door, in his old flannel shirt, telling me I'd made too much food again. That thought found me on a Wednesday morning in November, the day before Thanksgiving, standing in my own kitchen, surrounded by evidence of my own foolishness. 2 pies cooling on the rack, a turkey thawing in the sink, cornbread batter waiting in the bowl. I had been cooking since 6 in the morning because my daughter Nora had said yes. She had said yes 3 weeks ago, and I had held on to that yes like it was something fragile, something I needed to protect. The call came at 9:47 a.m. "Mom, hey!" Nora's voice was bright, casual, the voice of someone who hadn't spent 2 days preparing a meal. "So listen, we're actually going to head over to Kevin's sister's place this year. His family's doing a big thing and it just made more sense." I looked at the turkey in the sink. "I already started cooking," I said. "Oh," a pause. "Well, you can freeze most of it, right?" I didn't answer right away. I was looking at the cornbread batter, at the rolling pin I'd set out for the pie crusts I'd already baked, at the good tablecloth I'd ironed the night before and laid across the dining room table for 4 people. 4, not 1, because I had believed her. "Of course," I said finally. "Have a good time." She was already moving on before I finished the sentence. After I hung up, I stood very still for a moment. The kitchen smelled like cinnamon and butter. The oven hummed. Outside, bare trees moved in the wind. Roger used to love this time of year. He always said November light was the most honest light there was. No tricks, no warmth. Just the world exactly as it was. I thought about calling someone. My neighbor Helen Marsh, maybe, or my friend from church. But I didn't. Instead, I covered the cornbread batter with plastic wrap, turned off one of the oven burners, and sat down at the kitchen table with my coffee. Happy Thanksgiving to me. This was not the first time. I want to be honest about that because I spent a long time pretending otherwise. 2 years earlier, Nora had called the morning of Christmas Eve to say they were staying home. The year before that, she'd shown up to Easter dinner 40 minutes late, stayed for less than an hour, and spent most of it on her phone. Each time, I found an excuse. Kevin's work was stressful. The drive was long. Life got complicated. I was very good at finding excuses for other people. Roger died 4 years ago. Pancreatic cancer, 7 weeks from diagnosis to the end. I was 61 years old and I had been married for 34 years, and then I was not. The grief of that is its own story. What matters here is that after Roger died, certain things I had always overlooked became harder to overlook. Like the fact that Nora called me mostly when she needed something. Like the fact that Kevin, my son-in-law, Kevin Aldrich, had a way of steering every conversation toward real estate values and retirement timelines, and what Roger's pension would look like once it transferred. Like the fact that my granddaughter Poppy, who was 15, always seemed to know things were wrong before I admitted them to myself. But on that Thanksgiving morning, I wasn't thinking about any of that yet. I was just tired and sad, and sitting at a table set for people who weren't coming. I ended up eating alone that day. Turkey, mashed potatoes, 1 slice of pie. I watched the Macy's parade on television with the volume too low, the way Roger always hated. He always said if you're going to watch something, actually watch it. I turned it up louder than necessary and sat in the middle of the couch and ate my pie from a good plate with a proper fork, because I was still a person who deserved a proper fork. That was the first small decision. It felt ridiculous. It also felt important. The weeks after Thanksgiving passed slowly. December arrived with its particular pressure, the kind that amplifies whatever is already wrong. I decorated the house anyway, put up the small tree Roger and I had bought together the year we moved in. I hung the ornaments we'd collected over 30 years of marriage. Poppy came by on a Saturday, with Kevin's sister's kids in tow, supposedly to help decorate, and she lingered afterward when the others left. She sat at the kitchen table and watched me make hot chocolate and didn't say much, but I could feel her watching me the way a person watches someone they're worried about. "How are you really doing, Grandma?" "I'm okay, sweetheart." She didn't look convinced, but she was 16 by then, still trying to figure out where her loyalties were supposed to land, and I didn't want to put her in the middle of anything. Christmas came and went. Nora and Kevin sent a gift card and a poinsettia. I sent gifts for everyone, wrapped and ribboned the way I always had. I made myself a proper dinner on Christmas Day and called my sister in Florida and told her everything was fine. In January, I started going through Roger's things. Not because I was ready, because the house felt too still, and movement seemed better than stillness. I started with his dresser, then his closet, then finally, on a gray Tuesday morning, his study. Roger had been a civil engineer for 31 years. His study reflected that. Everything organized, everything logical, everything labeled. I had expected to find files and technical manuals and the fishing catalogs he used to leave everywhere. I found those things. But in the bottom drawer of his oak filing cabinet, underneath a manila folder labeled Insurance, Crank, I found a wooden box. It was dark-stained, about the size of a shoebox. No lock, no label. I had never seen it before. My hands felt strange as I lifted it onto the desk. Inside were several envelopes. Most contained what I expected: investment summaries, account records, insurance correspondence, and then at the bottom, a sealed envelope. My name on the front in Roger's handwriting. Bet. Just that. One word. My name, the way only he wrote it, the letters slightly tilted to the right because he always wrote in a hurry and then felt guilty about it. I sat down in his chair. For a long moment I didn't open it. I just held it. 4 years he had been gone, and here was his handwriting, and here was my name. And the room smelled faintly of him still, cedar and coffee, and something I couldn't name, but had always associated with safety. Then I opened it. My bet, the letter began. If you're reading this, I'm probably not around to remind you to take your vitamins, which means you've definitely stopped taking them. I laughed out loud. I had, in fact, stopped. The letter continued. I needed to tell you something practical and something true. The practical thing first. I leaned forward. Roger explained that 15 years ago, when we'd sold our first house and made more than we expected, he had set aside a portion in a separate brokerage account through his colleague, a financial advisor named Stuart Gaines in Indianapolis. He had never mentioned it, he wrote, because he wanted to make sure it grew without either of us dipping into it out of ordinary anxiety. He included account numbers, a phone number, Stuart's firm name. He said the account had been compounding for 15 years, and I should call Stuart before I made any decisions about anything. I sat with that information for several minutes before I kept reading. Now the true thing, Roger wrote. I have watched you put yourself last your entire adult life. I watched you put me first. I watched you put Nora first. I watched you make yourself smaller in every room so that other people could feel bigger. You thought you were being generous. You were. But Bet, I need you to hear this. I was crying by then. Quietly, just sitting there. You are not a supporting character. You are the whole story. Spend the money. Do the things we talked about and then didn't do. Take the trip to the Outer Banks. Learn to throw pottery the way you always wanted. Buy yourself something beautiful for no reason at all. And if anyone in your life is treating you like a resource instead of a person, I want you to remember that you have options. The letter ended. Don't wait for permission. You never needed it. I sat in that study for a long time after I finished reading, sometimes crying, sometimes just breathing. Eventually, I picked up the phone and called the number Roger had written down. Stuart Gaines answered on the second ring, and when I told him who I was, his voice shifted immediately into something warm and careful. Mrs. Calloway, he said, I've been hoping you'd call. The account was real. More than real. Roger had been cautious and patient, and had let the account grow in exactly the way he planned everything, quietly, without fanfare, without anyone else needing to know. When Stuart walked me through the numbers, I had to ask him to repeat them twice. I drove home from Indianapolis on a Tuesday afternoon in late January, and the whole way back I thought about options. Not revenge, not anger. Options. I had never thought of my life in terms of options. I had thought of it in terms of obligations, responsibilities, schedules, other people's needs. Roger's letter had used the word deliberately. I was certain of that. He always chose words deliberately. For 2 weeks, I told no one about the account. What I did instead was start a list, not a to-do list, a want list. Things I had postponed so long. They had stopped feeling like wants and started feeling like fantasies. The Outer Banks, because Roger and I had talked about it for 20 years and never gone. A pottery class, because I'd been meaning to sign up since before Nora was born. A new coat, the expensive kind, because I had worn the same sensible wool coat for 11 winters. The coat came first. I drove to the nicest department store in Columbus, And I bought a deep teal wool coat with wide lapels that cost more than I had ever spent on a single piece of clothing. The salesperson said it looked wonderful on me. I believed her. I wore it out of the store. The small decision again. Still ridiculous. Still important. That Friday, I called my oldest friend, Dorothy Crane. Dorothy was 68, recently divorced, entirely impossible to fool, and the only person I knew who would tell me the truth without softening it first. We met at the diner on Broad Street that we'd been going to since 1987. I told her everything. The Thanksgiving call, the letter, the account, the coat. Dorothy listened without interrupting, which was unusual for her. Then she set down her coffee cup and said, "Bet, can I say something?" "You're going to say it anyway. You've been apologizing for being alive since Roger died." I blinked. She continued. "Every time you tell me about Nora canceling or Kevin asking about the pension, you end with, 'But they're busy,' or 'I understand.' You never end with, 'And that wasn't okay.'" I looked down at my coffee. "It wasn't okay," she said. "Not any of it. And Roger knew that, which is why he wrote you that letter." I thought about her words all the way home. The pottery class started the second week of February. I almost didn't go. The studio was downtown, full of younger people, and I walked in feeling conspicuous. The instructor, a soft-spoken man named James, didn't make me feel conspicuous at all. He handed me a lump of clay, showed me how to center it, and said, "Everyone's terrible at this at first. That's the whole point." By the end of the first session, my hands were caked with gray clay, and I had a lopsided bowl that looked like it had survived a natural disaster. I took a photograph of it on my phone and laughed at it on the drive home. The way you laugh at something you're unexpectedly proud of. I booked the Outer Banks trip that same night. My finger hovered over the confirmation button longer than it should have. The guilt was immediate and familiar. The old voice that said spending money on yourself is selfish. That pleasure is something you earn after everyone else is satisfied. I sat with that feeling for a few minutes. Then I thought about Roger's letter. Then I clicked confirm. The following Saturday, Nora called. "Hey, Mom." Her voice was friendly, normal, no indication that she registered anything unusual in the world. They needed a favor. Kevin's firm was doing a charity event, very last minute, and did I still have the silver punch bowl and the long folding table from the garage? I said I did. She said, "Great. Could Kevin come by Sunday to pick them up?" I said, "Of course." Before she hung up, "Oh, how was Thanksgiving, by the way? Hope it wasn't too quiet for you." I held the phone for a moment after she said that. Hope it wasn't too quiet. As though my Thanksgiving was a minor weather concern. As though she hadn't canceled the morning I'd already started cooking. "It was fine," I said. "Good. Okay, so Sunday around 2? 2 is fine." Kevin came Sunday with his usual efficiency. He loaded the folding table into his truck, wrapped the punch bowl in a moving blanket, shook my hand the way he always did rather than hugging me, and was back in his truck in 11 minutes. As he was pulling out of the driveway, he rolled down the window. "You know, Bet, we should sit down sometime soon. Go over Roger's accounts, make sure everything's in order." I smiled politely. "I'll keep that in mind." He nodded, satisfied, and drove away. I went back inside and stood in the kitchen for a moment. Roger's accounts, as though they were a shared resource, a ledger he was owed access to. Kevin had been saying some version of that for 2 years. I had always deflected gently. That afternoon, for the first time, I felt something different when I deflected. Not anxiety, clarity. The Outer Banks trip was 12 days in late March. I rented a cottage on the Sound side, just one room really, with a porch that faced the water. I brought my good camera, the one Roger had given me for our 30th anniversary that I'd barely used. I brought 3 books. I brought the teal coat. The drive down took 9 hours. I stopped twice. I ate lunch alone at a barbecue place in North Carolina and had the best pulled pork sandwich of my life. I walked into my cottage at 7 in the evening, set my bag down, walked straight to the porch, and sat there watching the sun drop behind the Sound until it was dark. For the first time in 4 years, I felt something I didn't immediately have a name for. Later, I identified it as simply being somewhere I had chosen to be. On the 3rd day, my phone rang 4 times within a single afternoon. Nora twice, Kevin once, a number I didn't recognize. I was sitting on the beach photographing shorebirds, and I let all 4 go to voicemail. The action shocked me. Not because it was dramatic. Because it wasn't. I simply wasn't available. For the first time I could remember, Not being available felt natural. I called Nora back that evening. Mom, where have you been? The Outer Banks. Silence. The Outer Banks? Alone? Yes. Her voice shifted slightly, something I'd learned to hear over decades. A recalibration. Oh, well, when did you decide to do that? A few weeks ago. She was quiet for a moment. Is everything okay? Everything's fine. I'm having a wonderful time. Another pause. Kevin mentioned. He stopped by and you seemed a little off. Kevin had been there for 11 minutes and said 20 words to me. I smiled at the wall of my cottage. I'm not off, I said. I'm on vacation. The conversation ended shortly afterward. When I set down the phone, I noticed I didn't feel guilty. I noticed the absence of guilt, the way you notice the absence of a sound you'd gotten so used to, you'd stopped hearing it. My granddaughter Poppy called 2 days later. She was 17 now, a junior in high school, applying to colleges with the earnest intensity of someone who had decided her future was very serious business. When she heard I was at the Outer Banks, she gasped. Grandma, are you serious? That's amazing. Did you see any pelicans? Dozens of them. She wanted to know everything. What the water looked like, what I'd eaten, whether I'd talked to anyone interesting. We stayed on the phone for 45 minutes and she didn't ask once about finances or accounts or plans. You sound different, she said near the end. Different how? Happy, she said simply. Like yourself. I didn't know what to say to that. Happy like myself. As though those were the same thing. As though they should have been all along. When I came home from the Outer Banks, I had 412 photographs on my camera and a clarity I hadn't felt in years. Not peace exactly. Clarity, an understanding of what had been happening and what I wanted to happen instead. 3 weeks after I returned, Nora called and asked if she and Kevin could come for dinner. The invitation surprised me the same way Tyler's had surprised Dana. In years, it had become increasingly hard to get Nora to make the drive. There was always something more pressing. So when she suggested dinner, I agreed, and I immediately became attentive. They arrived on a Saturday evening. Nora brought wine, which was unusual. Kevin brought what I eventually recognized as his business posture, the slightly too upright way he sat when he was preparing to make a point. We talked about ordinary things for the first hour. Poppy's college list. Nora's work. A house down the street that had just sold for an amount that visibly impressed Kevin. Somehow every topic rotated back toward money, not abruptly, not obviously, the way water finds its level without appearing to try. Then Kevin set down his fork. Bet, I want to ask you something. There's some financial planning work Roger never quite finished, specifically around the pension transfer and the house. I waited. We've been thinking it might make sense to sit down with an advisor together, just to make sure everything's coordinated properly. Together, that word. Nora jumped in. We just want to make sure you're protected. Protected, another careful word. I looked at them both. Nora was watching me with an expression I recognized now, the one that looked like concern but was adjacent to calculation. Kevin was watching me the way he watched everything, assessing. I have my own advisor, I said. Kevin nodded. Of course, but it's good to have another set of eyes. I'm not worried about it, I said. Something flickered across Kevin's face. Brief, but I caught it. We just feel like since Roger's gone, Nora said, her voice getting softer, you might benefit from some guidance. Guidance. I set down my own fork. Roger's death has not impaired my judgment, I said. Nora looked startled. She wasn't accustomed to that sentence from me. Kevin cleared his throat. Nobody's saying that, Betta. Okay. I looked at him steadily. Then what are you saying? The room became quiet, a different quiet than a pause. We're saying, Nora said carefully, that at your age, and there it was, the same sentence Vanessa had finished elsewhere. At your age. I didn't let her finish it. At my age, I said, I am healthy, independent, legally competent, and currently managing my finances precisely the way Roger and I planned. And I'd appreciate it if we could talk about something else. Dinner ended pleasantly enough on the surface. We had dessert. Kevin complimented the pie, which was genuine. He did love pie. Nora hugged me at the door. But as I watched them drive away, I felt something I had not felt after these visits before. Not loneliness, something colder and clearer. I had finally heard what they were actually saying, not the words, the intention behind the words. And once you hear it, you can't unhear it. That night I called Dorothy. I told her about dinner, about at your age, about the careful way Kevin had said together. Dorothy listened. Then she said, Bet, what does your will currently say? I told her. She was quiet for a moment. You might want to revisit that. I thought about it all the following week, not out of anger, out of the same clarity I'd brought home from the Outer Banks. What did I actually want? Not what would make Nora comfortable, not what would satisfy Kevin's expectations. What did I, Bet Calloway, actually want my life and my legacy to mean? I made an appointment with an estate attorney named Patricia Howe, who had been recommended by Stuart Gaines. Patricia was methodical and unhurried, and had the particular gift of asking the right question and then waiting long enough to hear the actual answer. She asked me, "If you imagine the moment after your life ends, what do you want to have been true about it?" I didn't answer immediately. I thought about Roger's letter, about the Outer Banks, about the pottery bowl, still lopsided, sitting on my kitchen windowsill where I could see it every morning. I want to have used it, I said finally. My life. I want to have actually used it. We met 3 more times over the following month. The conversations were thorough, honest, and occasionally difficult in the way necessary things are difficult. By the end, I had a new document. Not a revenge document, a true one. The majority of Roger's hidden account, plus my own savings, would establish the Roger Calloway Memorial Fund, which would provide college scholarships for students from working families in our county. A separate allocation would fund a grief support program at the community center, because I knew too well what the year after a spouse's death felt like. And I wanted someone to have been better helped through it than I had been. Poppy would receive a meaningful sum when she turned 25, not because she expected anything, but because I had watched her grow into exactly the person I hoped she'd be. Nora would inherit the house, because I wasn't cruel, and because the house carried real memories I didn't want to be vindictive about. But the significant accounts, the majority of what Kevin had been quietly calculating, would go elsewhere. To students. To strangers in waiting rooms who needed someone to have thought of them. I signed the documents on a Tuesday afternoon in April. When Patricia slid them across the desk, I picked up the pen without hesitation. It didn't feel like punishment. It felt like clarity made permanent. I didn't tell anyone. Poppy didn't know. Nora didn't know. Kevin certainly didn't know. The week after I signed, I enrolled in a second pottery class. This one focused on glazing, which I had learned was its own entire skill. I also signed up for a photography workshop in Asheville, North Carolina, offered by a woman named Frances Reed who had been photographing the Southern Appalachians for 30 years. I had found her online at 2 a.m, sent a registration email before I could talk myself out of it, and received a confirmation by breakfast. The morning I signed up for the workshop, Nora called. "Mom, hey, have you talked to an attorney recently?" I kept my voice even. "Why?" Kevin was just saying, it might be a good time to update certain documents, while everything's straightforward, while you're still easy to manage. I understood the sentence perfectly. "I have an attorney," I said. "Everything is in order." "Oh, good." She sounded uncertain, not reassured. "Good." I let the silence sit. She filled it. "It's just, you've been doing a lot of things lately. The trip, the classes." I smiled at the kitchen window. Spring was coming. There were crocuses in the garden, the purple ones Roger had planted the year we moved in. "Yes," I said. "I have." She didn't know how to continue. I didn't help her. A few weeks later, I got a letter. Not from an attorney, not officially threatening, but drafted on law firm letterhead, expressing concern about certain patterns of financial behavior and suggesting that a competency evaluation might be in order given my recent uncharacteristic activity. Recent uncharacteristic activity. I read those words 3 times. 1 coat, 1 trip, 2 pottery classes, a photography workshop. These were the things that had worried them enough to contact a lawyer. I sat down and called Patricia Howe. She laughed, not unkindly, just the short, precise laugh of someone who had seen this before. "This is what we call a trial balloon," she said. "They want to know if you'll be frightened into compliance. Are they going to try to have me declared incompetent?" "They have no grounds," she said. "You are healthy, oriented, financially literate, and the decisions you've made are entirely reasonable by any standard." She paused. "Do you want me to respond?" "Yes," I said. "Please respond." Patricia's response letter was 3 paragraphs, measured and firm, and it mentioned words like legal standing and documented capacity and recent updates to estate planning. I didn't see Kevin's face when he read it, But Nora called that evening, and her voice was different, quieter, careful in a new way. Mom, did you change your will? I've updated my estate planning, yes. Silence. Can I ask what changed? You can ask me anything, I said. That doesn't mean I'll answer it. Another silence, longer. Mom. Nora, why are you doing this? The question genuinely surprised me. Not because it was unexpected. Because she seemed to actually want to know. For the first time in a long time, she sounded less like someone managing a situation, and more like someone who was confused, and maybe, underneath that, a little afraid. I thought before I answered. I took my time. Because for 4 years, I said, I have been sitting at tables I set for people who didn't show up. I have been cooking turkeys for Thanksgivings that got canceled the morning of. I have been waiting to matter to you in the way I mattered to your father. And I have finally understood that waiting is not a strategy. The silence after that was very long. I'm sorry about Thanksgiving, she said finally. Her voice was different. I know. I didn't know it hurt you that much. That surprised me more than anything. It shouldn't have. That was the thing I had hidden so thoroughly, from her and from myself both. It did, I said simply. She didn't have anything to say to that, and I didn't try to fill the space for her. We stayed on the phone for another minute without speaking, which was more honest than most conversations we'd had in years. In May, I drove to Asheville for the photography workshop. It was 4 days. A small group of 12 people, most of them strangers, all of them there, because something in them was still reaching toward something. Frances Reed was 72 years old and moved through the mountain landscape as though she'd grown up from it. The first morning, she asked us each why we'd come. When it was my turn, I said, because I spent a long time documenting other people's lives and I want to learn to document my own. Frances looked at me for a moment. Then she nodded once, the way a person nods when they recognize something. That's the only reason worth having, she said. 4 days in the mountains, waterfalls, fog, ridgelines, morning light on the valley below Asheville. I took photographs I was genuinely proud of. I also met a woman named Clara Jenks, who was 66 and had retired 2 years earlier from teaching high school English, and who had the same laugh Dorothy had, unexpected and total. We ate dinner together 3 nights in a row and talked about everything and nothing, and exchanged numbers at the end. I drove home with 500 photographs, and a lighter version of myself. The afternoon I arrived back, there was an envelope on my kitchen table. Nora had a key. Inside the envelope was a photograph, one I recognized immediately. It was from my 62nd birthday, Roger's last birthday with us, taken in the backyard. Roger and Nora and I were standing together, Roger's arm around both of us, everyone squinting into the late afternoon sun and laughing at something I could no longer remember. Nora looked young in it. I looked happy. Roger looked like Roger. On the back, Nora had written 4 words. I miss him too. No explanation. No ask. Just that. I held the photograph for a long time. Then I put it on the windowsill next to the lopsided pottery bowl, where I could see both of them every morning. 2 weeks later, Nora came by without Kevin. That was new. She knocked, which she almost never did, and when I opened the door, she was standing there with a grocery bag and a slightly uncertain look. I thought I'd make dinner, she said, if that's okay. I stepped back and held the door open. She cooked pasta, which she learned from me. We sat at the kitchen table, and we sat the kitchen table the way we used to sit when she was in high school, and we'd stay up too late talking about things that didn't matter, and everything that did. It wasn't easy. We weren't suddenly easy with each other. There were pauses that felt cautious, topics we navigated around. But there was effort, hers. Real effort directed at me, not at managing me. At one point she said, I talked to Kevin about the way we've been. I waited. He thinks I'm overreacting, she said, but I don't think I am. You're not, I said. She looked at her pasta. I know I've let you down. The words came quietly. Real apologies don't contain conditions. They don't arrive with explanations attached. They just arrive. I reached across the table and touched her hand. I know you know that, I said. She didn't look up right away. When she did, her eyes were wet. I want to do better, she said. That's all I needed to hear. We didn't resolve everything that night. We weren't going to. 30 years of a mother-daughter relationship that had gradually tipped out of balance doesn't correct itself over one dinner and a bowl of pasta. Trust rebuilds the way Roger said most good things were built. Slowly, unglamorously, one load-bearing piece at a time. But that night mattered. It was the first night in 4 years that I went to bed feeling like my daughter had seen me. Not managed me, not planned around me, seen me. In August, the Roger Calloway Memorial Fund made its first scholarship awards. 4 students from our county. A girl from the East Side who wanted to study nursing. A young man who'd been working nights at a grocery store to help his mother and had somehow maintained a 3.9 GPA. A first-generation student who'd never had anyone in her family tell her college was possible for her. And one more whose essay I had read twice because it was about grief, specifically about losing a parent, and about how grief either makes you smaller or teaches you to take up exactly the space you need. I attended the award ceremony at the community center. There were perhaps 70 people in the room. Dorothy was there. Patricia was there. Poppy was there. And when the students were announced, she leaned over and whispered, "Grandpa would have loved this." "He would have," I said. She squeezed my hand. I was asked to say a few words. I hadn't prepared anything formal. I stood at the small podium and looked out at the room and at the 4 students in the front row who would carry something forward that Roger and I had built together, even though he'd been gone for 4 years. My husband Roger believed in patient investment, I said. He believed in planting things you might not live to see grow. I paused. I am learning to believe in that too. But I am also learning something he tried to tell me before he left, which is that you don't have to be gone to give something. You can give it while you're still here, while there's still time, while the world still has the chance to tell you thank you. The room was quiet. I smiled. "And I have found," I said, "that nothing is quite as unexpectedly wonderful as being thanked." The applause was warm and real, and I stood in it without trying to deflect it, without stepping back from it, which was new for me. I let it land. Afterward, a young woman in a green cardigan found me near the refreshment table. She was one of the scholarship recipients, the one who'd written about grief. "Thank you," she said. "My mom died 2 years ago. I didn't think anyone was still thinking about people like me." I looked at her. She couldn't have been more than 19. "Your mom was a person who mattered," I said. "So are you?" She hugged me. 19 years old. And she hugged me like she meant it, and I thought about the year after Roger died when I had sat in this very building at a grief support meeting and cried into a styrofoam cup of bad coffee. Because I didn't know what else to do. Someone should have been better funded then. Someone should have had more time. Now maybe someone would. On Thanksgiving that year, Nora came. Kevin came too, quieter than usual, but present. Poppy came and brought her roommate from college, a girl named Addie, who was nervous and charming and ate 3 helpings of sweet potato casserole. Dorothy came. Clara, my new friend from Asheville, drove up from Columbus, where she'd moved to be closer to her sister, and the table was full. Not because I'd waited and hoped and set it for people who might not show up. Because I had built a life large enough that people wanted to be in it. Before we ate, Nora looked at me from across the table. "Happy Thanksgiving, Mom," she said. Simple, directed at me. Present tense. "Happy Thanksgiving," I said back. We held hands around the table and Roger's absence was there. The way it always was. The empty place that doesn't go away, but eventually, you learn to set a place for it too. To make room for it alongside everything else. And to understand that a life that still has this much in it was never as diminished as it sometimes felt. I looked around the table. At Poppy, who was home. At Dorothy, who had told me the truth when I needed it. At Clara, who had laughed until we both cried at a diner in Asheville, and then become someone I called on Sundays. At Nora, who was watching me now with an expression I hadn't seen in years. Something open in it. Something like trying. I thought about the teal coat, the lopsided bowl on the windowsill, the 500 photographs from the mountains, the 4 students in a room full of people who clapped because Roger's name was being used for something that helped someone instead of being argued over. I thought about Roger's letter. "Don't wait for permission. You never needed it." He was right. He was always, infuriatingly, right. And sitting there at my full table in the November light, I understood something I wished I'd understood sooner, though perhaps you can only understand it when you're ready. The point was never to take anything away from anyone. The point was simply to stop taking from myself, to stop telling myself that my happiness was a cost other people shouldn't have to bear, to stop making myself into the person no one worried about losing because I had already made myself so easy to overlook. The point was to be here, fully here. taking up exactly the space I was meant to take. I blew out no candles that night, made no wishes. I didn't need to. The life I was living was already the answer to everything I would have wished for.